It's finally here, one of the gardening days that I wait all year for. It's the day I start my tomato seeds. So join me as I show you all of the steps for starting tomato seeds indoors. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and the reason this is such an exciting day for me is because I've known it's been coming for weeks, because I have it annotated on my calendar that this is the day I'm starting tomato seeds. And this is the first step in the process, is actually identifying the best day for you to start your tomato seeds. And the way you determine that is by reading the seed packet. Now, I've got 18 different varieties of tomatoes here, and they all have the same basic guidelines. If you look at the seed packet, it should tell you to start your seeds indoors 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost. Or occasionally you'll have one that says 6 to 8 weeks before planting outdoors. Now, in my case, I give myself a 2-week buffer zone. My last frost date is May 18th, but I don't plan to put most of these plants in the ground until the end of May or the very beginning of June, because I've learned in my garden I'll often get really late season freezes at the end of May. But for you, if you have a more gradual warm up in spring, then you can follow the recommendation on the seed packet. Find out your last frost date and then start your seeds 6 to 8 weeks before that. And that's where the calendar comes in. In May, I have annotated when my last frost date is. And then I back it up 6 to 8 weeks, and that's when I start the seeds. And that day is today. Before we put any seeds into soil, it's helpful to get all of the pieces ready to go. Everything you're going to need to start the seeds. If you have it all laid out ahead of time, the process will go very quickly. It begins with a container. Now, you can use solo cups, you can use leftover pots from the nursery, you could use yogurt cups. It really doesn't matter much what you use. Now, I'm going to be starting a lot of seeds today. So my container of choice is one of these trays that has 72 individual cells, and I'll be filling this entire tray. Regardless of what you use, the next consideration is your soil mix, and you should use a seed starter mix. Now, I make my own. This is a blend of peat moss and perlite, and I'll link below in the description to my video where I show how I make this. It's very simple. We're looking for something that is light and has good drainage so that those little roots coming out of the seed have very little resistance. They can start growing right away. And this is a big reason why we don't recommend that you use soil from your garden. If you just dig up garden soil and start your seeds indoors, well, the seeds may not do as well. First, the soil is probably dense, and so it's going to be hard for those seeds to push through, but you might also be introducing some fungal spores to your grow area. And it's those fungi issues that really cause some damage, even death to young seedlings. So use a sterilized mix of perlite and peat moss. If you buy a seed starter mix, you will typically see that it is perlite and peat moss. It might be cocoa coir and perlite, but generally it's just a couple ingredients because we want that light, airy mix to begin growing. And then the next step is to get your seed packets. I have a lot of them here. You might have just 1 or 2, but match how many seeds you're planning to start with how many containers you have available. I'll be using a pencil as part of the process for starting these seeds, and I've got a grid map to help me identify where the seeds go. Now, if you're starting in one of these containers, it's really easy. You can write on the outside of the container the type of tomato that you're growing. You can put a piece of tape and then write on top of the tape so you know what's growing inside. In this case, I used to grow so many tomatoes that I would put most of the same type of seeds in one of these cell trays. And so I would put masking tape across the front and then identify that this whole block might be black crim tomatoes and this whole block might be vernissage tomatoes. That was really easy for me. But today I'm not growing that many of the same type. I'll be growing 2 of this, 4 of that, 6 of the other, and this is where this grid really comes in helpful. This is a simple grid of 72 squares, and each of these squares correspond to one of the cells in my 72 cell tray. And so what I'll do is I'll identify what I'm sowing in each of these individual squares. So for instance, let's put gold nugget in that square. And let's actually do 3 squares of gold nugget. And then in this square, let's go ahead and plan a Kellogg's breakfast. And we'll do 3 cells of Kellogg's breakfast. Now you can actually have your sowing plan completely done ahead of time by going through all of your seed packets and identifying which cells you're going to put those seeds into. Today I'm not going to fill out the entire grid before I sow. I'll keep track of it as I go along, though I will put the gold nugget and the Kellogg's breakfast in those specific cells. You also want to make sure you have some type of cover for the seeds to hold in humidity. Now in these tray systems, they usually come with a plastic dome. You could just as easily use a plastic bag. Or if you're doing something like growing in small yogurt cups, you can just take a food container. You put your containers on the bottom tray, and then you use this dome to cover those pots, and that holds in the humidity as well. We're using the moist soil mix, and so chances are we're not going to need to water much in the first few days or even a week waiting for these seeds to germinate. So by just putting a simple cover over our pots or our cell tray, we're allowing that soil to stay moist and giving the opportunity for those seeds to germinate and then start growing. I also make sure I have a watering can ready to go, and I have a spray bottle filled with water, and I'll be using this as one of the last steps when we sow the seeds. Now, because I'm using the grid system, I'm not that concerned right now with plant labels, but when I transplant all of the seedlings into a bigger pot or outside, I will definitely use plant labels. And so if you're using individual containers, yes, you can write on the outside of that container, but a plant tag right before you begin is a good idea. And consider using a metal or plastic plant tag. I've found over the years that if I use wood tags like popsicle sticks, well, over the couple months that these plants are growing in containers, that wood begins to become saturated with water. And then whatever you wrote on it tends to bleed. And by the time you go to put it in your garden, you may have no idea what that plant is. That's where the plastic and metal comes into play. And I like using a garden marker. And this is different than a permanent marker because it actually stands up to sun and UV rays. If you use something like a Sharpie on your plant tag and then put it outside, don't be surprised if it doesn't fade during the growing season. But there's something about the ink in this garden marker that makes it last for years. And I'll put a link in the description below so that you can get one of these like I have. Now, all the pieces are together, so it's time to start sowing seeds. And let's begin with the soil. The soil mix should be moist, but not sopping wet. So I'll take a handful to test the moisture level. If I squeeze it and it holds its shape, it's probably good. And then I can lift it up and squeeze it really hard. I can feel the moisture. I can feel a few drops in my hand, but there's no drops dripping from the bottom of my hand. So this is the ideal moisture level of this mix. And now we just take the moist mix and put it into our container. Now for a 72 cell tray, I scoop it out. If you're using one of the individual containers like a yogurt cup, just go ahead and scoop the yogurt cup and fill your container that way. This requires a little bit more of the soil mix, and so as I dump it, I'll just begin to spread it throughout all of these individual cells. It goes pretty well in the middle of the tray. If you don't want to make too big a mess, it helps to use two hands on the sides so that you can hold your hand and then just direct the mix into the cell so it doesn't flop all over the table. It all comes down to how big a mess you want to make and how fast you want to be. And there really doesn't need to be a rush as part of this step. This mix is going to stay moist. So just allow yourself the time you need to put the mix in the container. And as I'm doing this, and as I'm spreading the moist mix around, trying to fill all of these individual cells, I am intentionally leaving one of the corner cells empty. And there are a few reasons for that. One, when I orient my grid, I'll identify on the sheet of paper which of the squares is empty. That way I know what is the front and what is the back. I'll also put some tape on the front of these trays just so I know again what is the front and the back. It really doesn't do much good to go to all the effort of laying out that grid pattern if you get it upside down and end up mislabeling your plants, especially when you have a whole tray like tomatoes, because the tomato plants are not going to look different from one variety to the next. The only way you're going to know what you're growing is by having a good labeling system. And it begins with the grid system or with those plant tags. And so now this tray is filled with the soil, and it's time to start pushing it into the cells, because I've done a job so far where it's pretty loose and there might be some air pockets in these cells. So just using my fingers, I'm pushing the soil into the cells. And I'm really not trying to compress this much. I'm just trying to get as much of the mix as I can in these cells without leaving a lot of empty space. And especially around the edges, when you push down, it may be relatively empty. Then I'll add some more mix and do the same thing, especially with these, usually the corners, but often the side cells that don't get as much. And if they're a little underfilled, that's okay, because we can add more after we put the seeds in. We just want it all to be close to the same level at this point. And so by filling these trays and these individual cells, I'm now ready to start growing 71 plants, because this corner over here has no soil in it. And I'll explain another reason for doing that in just a little bit. So it looks like we're ready to start putting some seeds in. If you come across some big chunky pieces, especially if you're using peat, go ahead and take them out at this time, because they can interfere with the growth of the seedlings. And the same with big pieces of perlite. You can usually crush the perlite into smaller pieces, but if it's really big and doesn't break apart, remove it so that you're not interfering with the germination and the growth of the seedlings. You want to go ahead and check the seed packet again for this next step. And it should tell you that you want to put your seeds 1/4 inch deep. Now, surprisingly, a number of these different seed companies don't say that, but there you have it. 1/4 inch deep is what you're looking for when you're sowing your tomatoes. And let's go ahead and get started. I've got 3 right here that I'm looking forward to: Sun Gold, Sun Sugar, and Sun Peach. And I'm planning to compare the tastes of these later in the season. So with these 3, I'll go ahead and annotate where I'm going to put them. And so I'll write Sun Gold and put that into 2 cells. We'll do the Sun Sugar and put that in 2 cells. And then we'll do the Sun Peach and put that into 2 cells. So I've got a whole row figured out, ready to go. And let's go ahead and start with the Sun Gold. I'll just open up the package and then pour just a few seeds into my hand. And my plan is to put 2 seeds in each of these cells. Now, we've got 71 ready to go, which means I'll be starting more than 100 seeds. And I expect some pretty good germination rates, which means I'm going to have more than 100 plants. That's okay, because some are going in my garden, but I'm also planning to give away a number of seeds to family and friends and neighbors. So if you're growing in a tray like this, don't worry if you grow too many plants, because it's okay to share the plants, give them away, or create a little side business, grow a whole bunch of these and then sell them to your neighbors as well. So with these seeds ready to go, I'm going to use one of 3 primary methods for sowing the seeds, and I'll show you all 3 of those right now. The first method, and the one that I find the fastest, is one that I use a lot just because I have the experience growing seeds. And so we'll be putting these 3 different types into this row. I'll start by just taking some of the seeds and dropping them onto the surface. And then I just take my pencil tip and push them about 1/4 inch deep. For the next seeds, I'm going to start by making some little holes in the soil. And the holes are about 1/4 inch deep. Now, one reason I like using a pencil is because the eraser is about 1/4 inch deep. Now I'll take some more seeds and I'll try to drop 1 seed into each hole. Now, especially if you start with more seeds in your hand, you might drop more than 1 in a hole, but that's really not a big deal. And then with this method, we can do one of 2 things. We can either go ahead and cover up the hole with some of the extra soil on top, or I can take some of the extra soil I have from my container and put it on top. And then the third method of germination uses that same basic idea, where we're not making any holes at all. So I'll take my seeds. Now I'll put the seeds on the surface. And without any seeds in, or without any holes, now I'll just put the extra soil on top and then press that soil on top. And so 3 different methods to plant 3 different types of tomatoes, and now they're all ready to go. You are free to choose your preferred method. Like I said, I like to just drop a whole bunch of seeds and then cover them up. So for instance, with these Berkeley tie-dye, I'm going to be giving more of these away. So let's do 3 cells of those. And go ahead, open up the seed package, take some of these seeds, drop a couple seeds into each of the cells. Take my pencil, and all of these are planted. And so when I have a full tray like this, I can do it 1 package at a time, or like I'll do next is just lay out all of the seeds in the cells they're going in and then come back and rough up the soil to put them about 1/4 inch deep. You can do the same thing. Lay out all the seeds on your tray and then cover the whole thing with about 1/4 inch of soil. Now, particularly with the peat moss, I find it's a little more difficult to try to guess if you've got 1/4 inch of soil that you're adding to the top. So that's why I like to get in with my pencil. Now, if I'm using bigger seeds for sowing, then I'll typically do the hole method, where I'll start with the moist mix and I'll make a whole bunch of holes, and then I'll come back with the bigger seeds and drop them into the holes. So even I will vary the method from season to season, from plant to plant, from tray to tray. I suggest try all three. See what you like, and then you'll start developing that experience to keep going in the future with what you like to do fastest. That's what I'll do next, is just lay out the rest of the seed trays, and you can catch up with me in just a moment. Now that really didn't take long at all. I just opened up the seed packages, spread out all the seeds, and then put them in place. I wasn't that concerned about the number of seeds. I showed you doing 2 seeds per cell, but when you're in a hurry, like I was right there, I just poured seeds out and then sprinkled them. And some of these cells got 2, some got 3, a few might even got 4 seeds in them, but that's okay. I've got a lot of plants to grow and a lot of plants to give away. The next step is to go ahead and try to make sure that this moist soil is resting on those seeds. And so it's pretty loose right now, but if I take a spray bottle and spray on top of all of these cells, that's going to help get the surface a little wet, which is going to cause that surface soil to settle and give us a better chance that the seed and the soil have good contact, which will improve germination. And I'll also at this step go into this corner that I left open and add a little bit of water. One of the reasons I like leaving this open is I can see the water level at the bottom of this tray. Now this soil is moist. That's all the seeds are going to need for germination. But by adding a little bit extra water at the bottom, that reduces my need for watering over the course of the next 4, 5, 6 days. And so as I add water, I'm just looking for it to sink back down and just fill the bottom a little bit. And so with the seeds in place, now we're ready to cover with our humidity dome. And the germination is already begun. Those seeds are moist. They're starting to think about germinating. They have the medium that they're in, that the roots will grow. And the next step that they need is warmth. Now, the ideal temperature for starting these tomato seeds to encourage the germination is 70 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. My air temperature in the basement isn't that hot. Now, the seeds can germinate below those temperatures, but that's what's best. So I'll take a seedling heat mat to give me that extra little bit of temperature boost and really improve the germination. So the seedling heat mat is in place and plugged in. And now I'll just slide the seed tray on top of the mat underneath these lights. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on the lights right now. Now, I don't have to turn the lights on at this step. I could wait a few days, but I have had tomatoes germinate in as fast as 3 days in the past. That's one reason why I like to use a system like this, because I'll track the germination rate of these different varieties. So rather than wait a couple days and then try to remember to turn the lights on, I just do it now at this step, so that as soon as that very first seedling emerges, it has light and will begin growing. And these lights are on timers. I give my brand new seedlings 14 to 16 hours of direct light every single day. And then the timer clicks off. It really doesn't benefit the plants to go much more than that. You could leave your lights on for 24 hours in the first few days, but once those seedlings start growing, they need a rest period. So I have 16 hours of light on and 8 hours of light off, and the seedlings just do great. Now we just sit back and wait for that germination to happen. This is just the first phase in growing tomatoes. All of these tomatoes that I started today will be transplanted into bigger pots, and I'll definitely show you that in future videos, and I have some past videos that show that as well. For now, more than 100 seeds are getting ready to germinate. I'm pretty excited about that. That's why this is such a big day. If you want to see some of those other videos and see a little bit more about how to grow tomatoes, I encourage you to watch one of these videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.